All right, so in this screencast, I'm going to show you how you can create a VB.NET plugin using the Developer Toolkit. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, the Developer Toolkit that ships with the CRM 2011 SDK has lots of developer productivity to enable you to build and deploy and test plugins faster. The downside is for VB.NET developers, it doesn't provide you with C# templates. But what you'll see here is if I type something in here and click Save, this is going to spin up a plugin. And you'll notice here that we've got an error that came from a VB plugin. Notice I say it comes from a merged VB plugin. And the reason for that is that if you actually look at what we're building here and the approach we're going to take to enable this is that we'll have a plugins project that references VB code, and so this will be created by the Developer Toolkit templates and will leverage all the sort of stubbing out of plugins using the Developer Toolkit and the C# project, but we'll implement all of our actual plugin code in VB. Now, if you know anything about the way that CRM 2011 plugins work, is that when you've sandbox/database deployed your plugins, you can't actually have an assembly that references another assembly. So the way we'll get around this is to use a tool called IL merge. Now, while in this case this serves the purpose of being able to build VB plugins using the Developer Toolkit, this is also the same way that you would go about merging multiple assemblies into one so that you can actually have your code reference external assemblies. So the way IL merge works is it does exactly what it sounds like. It merges Microsoft Intermediate Language. So if you have a single starter assembly that references other assemblies, it'll look at that starter assembly and then it'll pull the intermediate language from the reference assemblies into that single assembly and produce an output that is a merging of those assemblies. So the real key to this is the steps to get to this end state. So again, we've got a CRM 2011 packaging project. It references this plugins project. That's where all the code generation from the Developer Toolkit is going to go. But then what we actually do is just call out to an externally referenced assembly, which happens to be implemented in VB.NET. So notice if I click on call me here, this is where all of our standard plugin code will go. Since we've passed the full context here, we can do whatever we could do in a C# plugin, but from this code right here. Since both the plugins project and the VB project that the plugins project will reference have some shared classes, we're going to have to go ahead and pull those classes out into a separate project as well so we don't get circular references. And then ultimately the final step is that we use this tool IL merge to basically say, after all these assemblies have been built, point to the root assembly here, and then the two assemblies it references, and merge them into a single assembly called merged.dll. Make sure we sign it with our strong name key, and then finally copy merged.dll over top of the original output of the plugin project and the PDB file. So why do we do that? Because the Developer Toolkit here, when I right click and say deploy, it will actually deploy the output of this project. And I don't know of another way to change that. So the final step is to basically overwrite the originally built DLL with the merged DLL before in a post-build step here before the plugin assembly gets deployed to the server. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. We'll start with a completely empty package. We'll use similar naming here, so I'll call this VB plugin IL merge walkthrough. So we'll start off with a CRM package. Again, this comes from the Developer Toolkit that's part of the CRM SDK. So we'll call this VB IL merge walkthrough. And my server is CRM 2011. And in my case, I'll just log on with my default credentials because in my VM I'm using Windows authentication. Grab our organization and our solution to deploy this to. All right, so this is the out-of-the-box experience so far, right? So the next step we need to do is come in here and say we want to add a new project, and we'll create a plugin library. And again, for naming conventions, let's just go back to what I called this. I called this plugins. So we'll just call this plugins. Click OK. And this is the standard experience that C# developers have. You get this base plugin class that the classes that the dialogues here, we'll show you in a second, will generate. So I'll come in here and I'll say, you know what, I want to create a plugin off of a specific entity, and we'll call this, we'll take a IL merge test, so I'll say create plugin. And in this case, we'll create it on update. So I won't go into the details of the Developer Toolkit. This is basically what it does to make it quicker and easier for you to build plugins. I'll go ahead and click OK. All right, and so the standard C# developer's experience is to basically just come in here and start implementing your plugin logic. And then in the CRM register file here, you'll see some metadata about how to deploy this plugin. To get this to work with VB, we have to do a couple things. First, we're going to have a VB project, so we'll come in here and we'll call the add a new one. And in this project, we'll just say add new other languages, Visual Basic, and we'll create a class library. Again, for naming, we'll call this VB referenced. VB referenced. Okay. Now, in order to get this to work, this project is going to have to reference plugin.cs and the classes that are in plugin.cs, and this project is going to have to reference this project. So we don't want circular references, so what we're going to have to do is create another project. In this case, this will be, I'll just keep it C# for simplicity, and we'll call it a class library, and we'll call it shared. Of course, you'd want to use better naming conventions, but I'll go ahead and delete that. All right. Now what I want to do is I want to remove plugin.cs and put it in this new shared project. Now, of course, we have to do a couple changes here. So first of all, what I've just done there is I've referenced Microsoft.xrm.sdk. Now, of course, I use ReSharper to make this easier, but basically I've referenced Microsoft.xrm.sdk in this shared project, which was already pre-referenced for us. We'll go ahead and I'm going to clean some of this code up using ReSharper, which is Control-EC, get some of the unused stuff in there. I'm going to rename this namespace. Of course, these are the places where you're going to want to go through, and if you're not using ReSharper, you're going to have to do this sort of stuff manually, but I'm going to go ahead and rename this namespace. And then one more thing I'm going to do is that there's a class called local plugin execution context. I'm going to change protection to public, and then I'm going to move this class to a separate file. And I'm going to do that with ReSharper, saying Ctrl-Shift-R, move to outer scope. And then I'm going to Ctrl-Shift-R and move this to another file. Now, of course, this is something that you're going to have to do yourself, but basically what I've effectively done is that this was a nested class inside of plugin.cs. I moved it outside to be at the same scope level as plugin.cs, and then I moved it to its own class. Okay, and now I'm going to do a few other things real quick, what ReSharper does, because I'm kind of a stickler for some of this cleanup stuff, is I'm just going to remove my unused references here. I'm going to remove my unused references here. Okay, we're going to rename this here to call me. .vb. Sure, why not? And then we'll just have a method called, if I get my VB right here, have to be public function here, of course. Okay, so finally, let's save all this. Then I need to come over here and come back into my plugin, and we'll say new do it, or new call me. So we'll have to add a reference, to VB referenced here, of course. And now, basically, I'm newing up the call me class, right? So I'm using VB referenced over here. So I'm newing up this class here. And I fix up a couple things here. Got to reference that library there. So again, ReSharper will do this for me. But basically what just happened here is I referenced that shared library from plugins as well. So now if I come back up to my plugin, go down to the bottom here, I'm going to create a new instance of call me, and then I'll say call me dot do it. Let's go ahead and clean that up. And then finally, I want to be able to pass this plugin execution context, right? So if I grab that and pass it to do it, of course, in my case, ReSharper is going to tell me add this to the parameter for the do it call. So now if I go over there, it's passing that local plugin execution context. And that's basically all that I needed to do. So let's go see what else ReSharper is barking at me for. Let's see. Make the constructor plugin public. Right, and so basically, again, that went over into here and made the constructor public, right? Because we moved files around a little bit, and so we had to change their access level. So we've got to reference system.serviceModel. So again, that basically just added system.serviceModel. And then we've got to add a reference to system.runtime.serialization. So that is there as well. Actually, let's just check, make sure I can build all this. So let's say build solution. Okay, so the build succeeded. So now, if I come in here, I can, throw a new invalid execution exception. And then that's in Microsoft.xrm.sdk. So I'll add a reference there, and that just referenced that in my VB project. Again, that's something you'd have to do manually, but now you can say, you know what? I can write plugin code in VB and use the toolkit. So that's all the steps necessary, and then from there you just sort of repeat the process, right? So next time, if I want to come in here and add another plugin, let's say I want to create, let's say one more. Let's create another plugin, and we'll create this one for delete. We'll click OK. And so that all that did is instead of referencing plugin internally, it referenced plugin from my shared project. Again, something you would have to go and do manually. But now if I can just copy this, right, and I could say, you know what, call this do something else. And then from my plugin, I can just basically write a little bit of C# for the wire up code, right? So we'll new up a call me. Right, and again, basically all that just did here for me is it added a using statement to my VB referenced assembly and the namespace for that assembly. And then I can just say, you know, call me dot do something else. Pass the local context. And then I can go to that method and just write my actual plugin code in VB. And again, you kind of repeat that process over and over again, and you're off to the races building plugins. So the one thing we've not introduced yet is the notion of being able to initiate the IL merge process so that this plugin, which references this assembly, so this plugin assembly, which references this external assembly and this external assembly, becomes one single DLL instead of 3 DLLs. Right, so if we open this up and we look at the directory, you'll notice we've got multiple DLLs here. All right, so if I switch back, really what we want to do now is come into the properties here. There's a couple things we always have to do with plugins. One is we need to sign them. So we're going to sign the assembly and create a new one. Of course, I'll just use a temporary one, but you should have your own. I'll say temp.snk. I'll save that. Now, of course, these need to be signed as well. So let's look at the properties here. We're going to sign. We're going to browse. So we'll go up one. Our plugins project and grab that SNK file. And then we'll do the same thing for our VB referenced. All right, we'll go up one, plugins, grab that SNK file. We'll build this all again. Excellent. So finally what we can do is we can come to the properties here, and in the build tab, build events tab, we want to put in a post build event command line. And so I'm not going to bore you with typing this out. I'm just going to come over here. Actually, before we do that, sorry, we've got one more thing. So to get IL merge, you could go to the public website, or you could just use NuGet. So I'm going to use NuGet here. And then if you want to search online for IL merge, let's see. Right, so it appears that NuGet is down during the time of me building this. So what I'm going to do is normally what you do is you come in here and you type IL merge. You'd get your NuGet package. You'd add it to the assembly project, right? And I'll kind of show how it looks over here. So here's I can say manage NuGet packages. I'll just say installed. Notice that there's an IL merge package. Right, what that does is that then I can open this project. Let's come back over here. And we can see that there will be, what you'll see is that once you've added it using NuGet, there'll be a directory called packages that gets added. So I'm just going to manually copy it over here. And then in the packages directory, there's the version of ilmerge and ilmerge.exe. So once you've got that done, you can basically just take this code, I'll copy it and paste it over here. Make sure we're in the right spot. Build events, post to build. And basically this just uses the right command lines again. So in our case, our project, we're going to our solution dir, packages, IL merge. We're calling IL merge. We're calling the output merged.dll. We're targeting the .NET Framework 4.0 and the directory that it exists in. We're just telling IL merge that. And then we're saying take the plugin DLL, right? That maps to this solution, that maps to this project right here, and explicitly say that it's going to reference shared.dll, which is this one here. Let's go ahead and scroll this down. And then it's also going to, it also references vbreference.dll, which is this one here. And they all use the temp.snk file from our project output. So what's going to happen is after a successful build, IL merge here is going to merge the DLLs into a single DLL called merge.dll, and then we're going to overwrite that DLL and its PDB file such that when if I were to right click here and say build, everything just works, right? So I'm going to come back to the working project that I have. And so now what happens is when I right click and say build, we look at the project output, you notice that the builds happened, IL merge did its thing, then we copied those two files. When I right click and say deploy, that whole build merge process is going to happen. And then once the merged DLL is merged, after the post build step is complete, the Developer Toolkit package project is going to deploy that DLL to the CRM server. And so we see we have a deploy succeeded here. And so that's what it takes. So this general approach was used to be able to enable us to take to use the Developer Toolkit to build a plugin using all the integrated Visual Studio capabilities. And then from there, we just create this basically serves as a wrapper, if you will, to call into a .NET assembly that you write in VB that has the full SDK available to it, so you can implement your plugin within multiple classes, a single class, whatever you really choose to do. And then what happens is that at build, the assembly for this gets built. Well, obviously the assembly for this and this get built. Then the assembly for this gets built. And then these three assemblies are merged into a single assembly that then gets with the same name as the original assembly for the plugins file, and that's what gets deployed to the server. So while there's a bit of upfront setup for this, once you actually get going, it's really as simple as coming in, right-clicking, adding your plugin, and then making a call to whatever's inside your VB code. So really, the plugin productivity is wrapped into the code generation that gets put into this project and the registration information that gets put into this file here, so that when you right-click and say deploy, we get a successful build, merge, deploy to the server. And the end result is, in fact, what you want, which is that single DLL deployed to the server, but ultimately your plugin code is written in VB.NET.